Hello, everyone. Welcome to session 4 of this Anthroposophical Leading Thoughts study group. Good to see you all again. So I'll briefly share some summary reflections, and then we can dialogue about these ideas, which Steiner is definitely being covering the same ground from different angles and um, deepening into the role that Michael plays in the Age of the Consciousness Soul. And so let me briefly run through the leading thoughts and sections that we read today. He talks about the split that we feel in this consciousness soul age between nature as something external out there, and then our ideas about nature as something that we um, develop independently on our own, as these inner sort of representations or dead abstractions, and that we don't tend to give much thought to how our ideas about nature affect ourselves. And Steiner's always emphasizing the role that the rise of natural science and scientific materialism, the role that it has played in um, our own human development and sense of freedom and autonomy, but also profound alienation, and that we need to consider natural scientific knowledge not just for what it reveals to us, and about nature and for the many practical benefits that it has brought to our modern societies, but also, yeah, for the way that it has changed us. Steiner describes the evolution of consciousness as descending like a ladder of unfolding thoughts. And he talks about how in earlier evolutionary epochs, thought lived or occurred initially in the ego as the expression of spiritual beings. And a subsequent epoch, thought occurred in the astral body and was more like the living images or gestures or manifestations of spiritual beings. Thought then descended further into the etheric and became a kind of echo of these spiritual beings. And then finally, thought descended fully into the physical body and became the dead shadows, the abstractions that um, we know today as modern, postmodern, scientifically, uh, people shaped by a scientific worldview. Our ideas have become these these dead shadows, and now we're at this point, and we've really passed that point of deepest descent into matter, and we're trying to re-enliven our thoughts. We're trying to recover, um, as we spoke about last time, to turn around to see the source of the light that produces the shadows that we tend to be conscious of in our thinking, and to cultivate an etheric form of thinking as we begin this reascent now out of our own freedom. Steiner describes how this process of reversing from the descent to the reascent, uh, that we will have Michael's help, but that Michael cannot force us to do anything. And so that the whole relationship between the archangels and humanity has changed, where the archangels play less of a director type role and now can lure us. Michael can um, create this majestic, alluring display that might lure us in this ascent, um, back towards a connection with the spiritual world. But we have to make that free decision. And part of why we needed to descend into the physical was precisely to develop that freedom, of course. And We have Michael's help, we have Christ's help, but we also have this Ahrimanic temptation, and we've reached a decision point at this point in our evolution, really especially since the 15th century, though Steiner also points to the 8th century, which I think is when scholastic thought began to develop, and there began to be more of an interiorization of what had been a cosmic intellect. The human being was appropriating this intelligence for itself, and it wasn't long after that that nominalism develops, right, as we spoke about last time. Um, but the 15th century begins the age of the consciousness soul, and Michael is already working there to help guide us back towards the spiritual world, but particularly in the last third of the 19th century, Steiner says that Michael has taken up his earthly office. And it's the peak of materialism at that time, and also when Michael's assistance becomes most apparent to those who have the eyes or the heart to see and hear him. Steiner said some interesting things about the stars. And, in earlier cultural epochs, human beings would perceive the stars as the like direct transmission of the spiritual world, as of spiritual beings. Gradually, that perception, almost a form of thinking as perception of these spiritual beings just streaming into us from the heavens, gradually waned, and the stars became more like uh, gestures of those spiritual beings who would stand behind them, and then eventually became more like frozen signs until now, when we look at the stars and our scientific common sense would say, okay, those are just balls of plasma um, that we can model and measure and so on, but they have no meaning, right? And so, but Michael is described as playing this role of allowing the human being to stay in harmonious connection with the stars, despite um, how far we've fallen into physical form, that in the life um, between death and a new birth, as our spirit is finding its way back into a next incarnation, Michael seems to play some role in uh, helping us coordinate with the movements of the stars and planets to help orchestrate the right karmic conditions for our subsequent incarnation. And so, Steiner will talk about how astrology doesn't work in the way it used to nowadays, but there seems to be still some deeper connection there established, or at least um, held in place by Michael. Yeah. So I think that's as much as I'll share as a review for what we've read, but would love to hear other people's reflections. If there was a particular leading thought that you found especially stirring, or one you'd like us to meditate on, I invite you to share it with us. Hey, Jeff, please.
I just have a brief comment, but to this particular section that you're summarizing, Matt, but to the book as a whole, he makes a lot of references to philosophy of freedom, and putting that into context of what he's talking about here, and specifically as to what you're summarizing right now. The, like the all important concept experience he points to in philosophy of freedom of the exceptional state, be kind of re-enlivening our thinking. This really puts it into a much bigger context of why we have something to enliven in the first place, like this whole descent of thinking down into the physical, as you've outlined and he outlines, and yeah, now with Mikhail's help, how we're ready for the or beginning the ascent back up, to the at least the enlivened thinking of the etheric body, and presumably we'll go up higher than that as well. But anyways, just a very brief comment on how he is adding much greater context and grounding to what the philosophy of freedom is about.
Yeah. So leading thoughts 109 to 111 really dwell on that. And yeah, he talks about how Michael can help us solve the riddle of human freedom in relation to the cosmos, insofar as the solution is necessary for earthly human beings. And, I think there, of course, of the situation Immanuel Kant leaves us in, where, he'll talk about the starry heavens above and the moral law within. The starry heavens above for Kant signify the deterministic mechanisms of nature, which he found wondrous. And, in Kant's cosmology or universal theory of the heavens that he wrote in the 1750s, that the universe obeyed such a perfect mathematical clockwork order for Kant was the best proof of a God that he could ever ask for. That's changed in our time after, the death of God in Nietzsche's sense and all of that. Now the mechanistic universe is the best proof of atheism that we could ever ask for a lot of people. So that's an interesting transition as we've really moved deeper and deeper into materialism in the 18th century, the late 18th century, when Kant was thinking about the lawful mechanistic order of the cosmos. It still spoke to him of divine beings who were behind that manifestation. And for Kant, there really was this conflict between freedom, the freedom of the human being, and the mechanism of the cosmos. And Steiner's trying to gesture towards the role that Michael plays in resolving that conflict, that riddle. And I think it only starts to resolve when we consider it all in the context of the evolution of consciousness, like what the connection is between human freedom and this mechanistic, materialistic picture of the cosmos, that we needed materialism to become free from um, the spiritual world so that we could then uh, return to a different type of connection with that world as a result of our own loving deeds, free loving deeds, right? Rosemary, please.
I wanted to bring something really special. The last letter, The Activity of Michael and the Future of Mankind, toward the end, he speaks about learning a new language. We ought to learn the Christ language, not only about redemption from nature, about the soul and things divine, but about things of the cosmos. When, with inward heartfelt feeling, we realize the mission and the deeds of Michael and those belonging to him, when we enter into all that they are in our midst, then we shall be able to maintain our human connection with the divine and spiritual origin and understand how to cultivate the Christ language about the cosmos. Well, 2 days ago, a Facebook friend of mine, Danny Fortier, he's a French Canadian living in Montreal, and occasionally he writes and posts a poem. And he posted this one on the 19th. And I think it's a really good example of a contemporary human being who's able to create something along the lines of this Christ language. I'm going to read the poem. Invocation to the center of the universe. We are the living theory of God, the existential crisis in the cosmos, the Leela of redemption with the gods, in the space we occupy, finality and cause. In the spirit is maintenance and trust, reason, root, and consequences, amongst duration and the clock. the seasons to the eternal or not. And so was and is the Word, in whom is the beginning and the becoming, the Alpha and the Omega. The progress that's been and will be the force of being, the will worlding with the divine light of beauty divine from aeon to aeon through all cycles of time, the I am and the Christ. May human beings rise.
Thanks for sharing that, Rosemary. Those lines that you pointed to, that we must be able to receive into ourselves the purely natural scientific way of thinking. So Steiner says, don't turn away from materialism. But we ought also to learn to feel and speak about nature in a way that is according to Christ. We ought to learn the Christ language, the Logos, not only about redemption from nature, about the soul and things divine, but about the things of the cosmos. And I think there are a few things. One was Paul's letter to the Romans, chapter 8, where he talks about how the whole of creation is um, groaning in the pains of childbirth, waiting for human beings to recognize their divine nature again. And so it's not just that the Christ being saves us, it's the entire cosmos that is transformed by this deed. And our mm, free assent to it, um, our ability to receive it, transforms the whole cosmos. And I also think of something that Owen Barfield says in Saving the Appearances. He says, in the future, it will become impossible to write a popular manual of science without referring to the incarnation of the Word. And so, elsewhere in that text, he talks about how evolutionary theory, and the uh, historical emphasis of the biblical tradition have so far not really been recognized as being so profoundly congruent with one another. Usually, evolutionary theory and um, Christianity are thought to be at odds with each other, whereas Barfield says there's a deep underlying correspondence here. The idea that the relationship between the divine and the natural world can only be understood historically as a gradual evolutionary process of a sort of sequence of revelations. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin also understood this deep symmetry, of course. But yeah, I think being able to recognize the logos at work, not only in our own souls, but in the cosmos at large, is a big part of our task. Karsten.
Thanks, Matt. I was thinking about just before Leading Thoughts 112 to 114, Steiner's writing about how when we speak only in the natural scientific way, how that corresponds to the separation of intellectuality from the original divine and spiritual. And then he says that this can indeed lead over into the arithmetic realm if Michael's mission remains observed, but it will not do so if through the power of Michael's example, the intellect which has become free finds itself again in the original cosmic intellectuality. I think this is related somehow to what you're talking about right now, and the whole discussion right now. But I have kind of I have a sense when Stan is talking about this arithmetic power that there's some kind of alarmism here, that he's talking as if there's a danger. And what I'm somehow missing, so also in Leading Thought 117, he's talking about this choice. Sorry.
I think there was a
Yeah,
typo
he's
in the
talking about
book.
man can unite himself. In Leading Thought 117, he's talking about how man can unite himself either with the powers of Christ or with the dominions of Ahriman.
Yeah.
And I understand this choice that we have, that we are at this point of crisis, you could say, where we could go individually and collectively. We can go either one way or the other. But what I'm somehow missing from Steiner, and maybe it's because I haven't read enough Steiner, is kind of the blessing that is inherent in the darkness. That, I mean, I recently learned about this Japanese philosopher. He's called Keiji Nishitani, and he's written a famous book called Self-Overcoming of Nihilism. And one of his points is that this experience of nihilism is in itself, if you go deep enough, a spiritual experience. Going into the kind of materialistic, atheistic state, experience the meaninglessness of life and the kind of moral vacuum. And I think this is the kind of experience that Dostoevsky was a true master in portraying in some of his best works, like Crime and Punishment, where you have this character Raskolnikov committing a murder simply because he can, and he wants to prove to himself that he's capable of committing a murder. And I think Dostoevsky, he's quite he's master in describing how this experience can actually lead into some kind of redemption and resurrection, in a sense that you can go through the darkness, and even if you go deep, say, into the dark experiences, the moral vacuum and so on, there are some blessings to be found there. And I feel strongly about this because this was also my own experience coming into the spiritual. I was never looking for any kind of spiritual teaching. On the contrary, I was quite satisfied with being in this kind of nihilist vacuum where there were no meaning, and fully immersed myself into it. And in this immersion into the darkness, I suddenly, without willing it, had this awakenings. I think I shared some details about it in a previous meeting we had, where I suddenly became aware of our immortality and the whole divine field that we, no matter where we are in the evolution, are always immersed in. So I was just thinking, I have this sense when I read Steiner that, but maybe it's because I haven't read enough, that there's a kind of favorism of the light over the darkness, and this kind of alarmism. But maybe some of you who know Steiner much better than I can comment on that, and I can learn something that I don't know right now.
Hmm. Yeah, thank you, Karsten. I really resonate with that. I'll share some comments. I want to let Alexandra chime in first.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Hmm.
Yeah, no expert on Steiner here. Like, I think you were there when I shared, like, just over a year into this, and yet, like, I see both. I see this like call to action, I think, of this kind of like doomsday scenario if we don't observe Micaiah and follow in his path and follow in the path of Christ. But in it, in all of his work, I feel such hope and peace and like even joy. And when I came to his work, I was like kind of in the new agey, I'll be honest, new agey spiritual kind of community, I guess you would say, like, oh, what star seed am I? I never really like did that, but I was like, kind of this is like the way I came into anthroposophy. That's where I was at. And so when I, and it was like, oh, we're entering the golden age now, and like all these sorts of things. And I was like, oh man, I feel really late, like showing up to this like spiritual awakening, and we're in the golden age. Like what? So like coming to Steiner was like, oh no, this, going back to this evolution of consciousness. Like I think that's one of the most profound things Steiner has brought us, right? It's like we can we can take this idea of the steps of the evolution of consciousness and look back through history and then kind of look forward as well and see where we are. And in that, I found just a sense of like peace and purpose and hope. So, I mean, I don't know how, I can't say how I see that, if that makes sense. I just feel it. I feel the hope of his words. And he talks about, how Michael is standing Ahriman under his feet. And I think this is something we hear so often in a biblical sense, that we can take this picture, this image, and put ourselves in that spot of putting Ahriman, putting Lucifer under our feet and feel into what that feels like. And for me, that's like feeling, like he talks about feeling all the way through this. And I think we've kind of brought up this idea of feeling, but like really, it's in everything he talks about. And I'm doing his thought control exercise. Even in his thought control exercise, I didn't get anything from it until I went back and I read the feeling you're supposed to have during the thought control exercise. Right. And it's like just so different than we think about intellect, how we've worked with our intellect. It's like our thoughts then feeling into them. And so I think that's just what he does for me when I'm reading it and I'm just feeling into it. It's like I try not even to intellectualize it very much at all and kind of play back and forth between my intellect and my feeling. And that's kind of that middle path almost right there. Not getting too worked up in the doomsday scenario, being called to action, but through a feeling and through a stance, a position, of standing up. I don't know if I made any sense there. But it's so every time I read him, it's just I feel the urgency as well as we have time. I feel the call as well as I'm trying to become more patient because again, I'm like a year into this and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I found it. And like I experienced, I was an atheist. I went to Queen's University and we had a lecture on whether God exists. It was like a public lecture that they held, and they had like, I don't know, a priest and then like a scientist come on stage and debate whether God exists. Like this is the state of things. And it was like there wasn't even, I wish I had like a level of like clairvoyance at that point to see like the beings standing behind these two people, because like they couldn't even relate. Like there was no conversation, there was no debate. It was just two people talking about totally different things. So it's just through esoteric Christianity, through Steiner, through anthroposophy, we can begin to bring these two things together and like kind of merge them so that there is even room for a discussion at all. about God and the divine. And that's what I see and feel. And it's really moving and empowering. And also, yeah, I gotta hold back my own excitement sometimes. Thank you.
Yeah, wonderful to hear a bit of your story, Alexander. Thanks for sharing that. And I think that debate that you're talking about really illustrates the situation we're in quite well, where whether you're a religious believer of some kind or an atheist, it seems like both camps in that kind of science versus religion debate are intellectualizing um, God, whether God exists or not. Whereas religion is really, I mean, as Steiner would say, it's a matter of um, our etheric being and our character, and you know, religion and spirituality are more about um, how we engage in practices and how we engage in community life so as to transform our character. So it's more about transformation, processes of transformation at a deep level, rather than about the information that we assent to or disbelieve in. You know, it's already so far gone into this kind of intellectualism and debating dead thoughts, you know, to even construe the cultural situation in that way that it so often is, as science versus religion. Um, I wanted to, if I could go back to um, what Karsten was raising about nihilism and like what's going on with the like evolution of consciousness, that we need to descend so deeply into matter as part of this process of awakening. And if I can, I actually want to share my screen here. Um, can you all see that white page?
Mhm.
So, you know, Steiner is in the Neoplatonic lineage, or just the Platonic lineage, I would say. And in Plotinus, you have this account of a series of emanations from what's called the One, and the One is often referred to as being beyond being, right? It's not like the numeral one. The whole negative theology tradition that says that, you know, the only way we can approach the divine nature is through paradox, the coincidence of opposites, and so on. So God is both being and non-being. But this, for Plotinus, this one, which we can only merge with in a kind of mystical rapture, is so fecund, so full that it overflows itself to give rise to this next level of emanation, which he calls intellect. And I think when Steiner speaks of the cosmic intellect that Michael has responsibility for, oops, it would be something like this level of emanation, this next step down from the one. Um, the Greek is nous. But then the intellect also spills over um, into the world soul, and this is, you know, kind of akin to this sequence that Steiner describes, where thought lives in the ego, would be more like um, this top level, when thought lives in the astral body, when thought lives in the etheric body. Um, and there's a sort of gradual withdrawal of our connection to the one as these emanations occur. And, you know, the world soul also overflows itself, and all that's left is what Plotinus would call matter, or really non-being, and just the sensory world imagined as if it were, you know, um, the only reality, which from a Platonic point of view, it's mere Maya, it's an imitation of reality. And that, you know, without the forms, the ideas that live in the intellect to give shape to this material world, it would be a true nothing. But there's a way in which the qualities of matter and the qualities of the one coincide in some paradoxical way. Just as the one is beyond being, matter is non-being. And so this kind of nothingness at the lowest level is simultaneously a kind of infinite fecundity that becomes indistinguishable from the one. And so instead of thinking of this as like a linear descent, it's more, I think, almost like a lemniscate, right? Where the one and matter or nothingness, yeah, strangely coincide. And I think this is just a schematic way of, trying to grasp the what's at play in the evolutionary process. Well, first a sort of devolution or involution into matter, and then an evolution back out of matter. There's so much of this already in the work of Plotinus, and I thought that this little schematic drawing might help us get a map of what's going on here. Um, Douglas, I see your hand next. Make sure you unmute.
So I was trying to get a citation here. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Fantastic. I've got one fairly basic question and then one that's a little bit more in depth. I am relatively very new to Steiner, and it seems to me that there is more to his use of the term Mikaeo than is put forth in this specific text. And I'm wondering if that's Christian or specific to Steiner's previous works. So that's one question. And then more complicated, you speak of the world soul, as well as the effect of the stars. And I'm reminded of Rupert Sheldrake's work on morphic resonance and one of his more recent pieces, which I was just trying to look up, on speculating whether the sun was conscious. And if you see any applicability of Sheldrake to the work of Steiner, could morphic resonance be the world soul? And that there is a stellar soul as well, that there's two levels of that. And it's just open-ended speculation on my part, questions that are coming to my mind. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Douglas. I think of Rupert Sheldrake's work as an example of this, what Steiner is calling for, a rediscovery of logos in our picture of our natural scientific picture of the cosmos. So exploring the possibility in a scientific way, in a natural philosophical way, of the sun being a conscious being is, yeah, I think a great example of a Christic approach to science. And there are other exemplars of this, but I think Rupert Sheldrake's a prime example of that. And in our time, in terms of the angelic hierarchies, I think this is an idea that goes back to the ancient Persian world. It's in Judaism. It's in early Christianity and continues to be developed by the Catholic Church. It's in the Islamic tradition, and it's this idea that the divine, the Godhead, has a host of kind of messengers that dispense um, the wisdom and the love almost through a kind of emanational process, very similar to Plotinus's scheme that I just outlined. And there are um, archangels that are important at different times of human history, and different religions emphasize different archangels. I think in Islam, the archangel Gabriel, or Jibril in Arabic, was the one who basically spoke the Quran to Muhammad, right? And Michael for Steiner is the archangel who's responsible for um, maintaining the connection between the human being and this human being, our intelligence and the cosmic intelligence. and plays a particularly important role at this um, crucial moment in helping to guide us away from um, this Ahrimanic form of consciousness and materialism that would lead us to continue the descent into, what Steiner would call the subnatural, even rather than to now, reverse this process. We've gotten as physical as we need to get to realize our freedom, and now Michael is supposed to help us turn back towards the light, as it were. And I think, as we were saying earlier, Steiner's not trying to, this isn't a new age form of spirituality where spirituality becomes synonymous with whatever feels good. Um, there's a lot of shadow work. There's a lot of confrontation with adversarial beings, not just Ahriman, Lucifer. Lucifer will become part of our reading, I think, in the next session. Lucifer hasn't been mentioned yet in the leading thoughts, but these two adversaries are there um, as the extremes that we need to avoid, and Christ in some ways the middle path. And I see a lot of New Age spirituality is, yes, it's resisting the Ahrimanic materialism, but maybe is verging a little bit too far into the Luciferic, like all light and positive feelings all the time, and like we could just escape it all and hover above the strife. Um, that's not the Christic path that Steiner is advocating for. It's too one-sided. Um,
So if I was to read more on Michael, I should look up the
Douglas, when you have your video on, your audio doesn't come through. It's too garbled.
Tradition in the Christian history or in the mystic Christian history as the archangel.
So I only caught some of
Near
that.
that.
I thought I caught some of that, but I think you're asking where you can read more about Michael and um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Is it in the Christian tradition,
Yeah,
mystic Christian tradition?
definitely. And there's medieval
Yes. Okay,
medieval
thank you.
paintings of Michael that you can find where, the images of a kind of knight-like figure with a sword who is literally putting the dragon under his feet, right? And so that's where this imagery that Steiner is talking about comes from. Yeah. Jeff.
Sin, I'm thinking about what you're raising of your question if Steiner is being alarmist, and I've more or less had those kinds of impressions and feelings as I read different texts of his, and my own personal response, like we've got big work to do. We better get busy. But yeah, I think there's certainly something to that, and there's something to what Steiner is doing there. But yeah, the you asking that is kind of opening up a new angle or question for me, and I'm wondering if, in a sense, he's maybe correct to be alarmist in one way, but not now. What I'm thinking is maybe not so much in the sense of like the horror we feel in a hero villain movie where is the world going to be saved or is it going to be blown up or whatever, like are we all gonna be wiped out, but more in the sense of um I guess it's his way of elevating the urgency for us individually to grasp what he's talking about with really getting into the essence of what human freedom is and activating that for ourselves. And as we read in certain ways, and I think the last book this group did, the Outline of Esoteric Science, that I guess we could say this is kind of the paradox of freedom in a certain way. We know humanity will be saved. However, in the Outline of Esoteric Science, it's like what will come is a split of humanity into two sub races or something. I forget his language there, but where yeah, one group will ascend up and the other group will follow downward on the materialistic aromatic path. So if nothing else, maybe this is what your question points me to, is more of an individual salvation Steiner's is urgently pointing us to, and not that the world is going to get blown up by the villains.
Yeah, that coming speciation event, let's call it, seems almost to be have accelerated, that it's going to happen even sooner than Steiner maybe foresaw, just given current techno humanist developments. Um, but I also feel like there's ultimately, like the process of reincarnation and individuation of souls by physical bodies during this earthly epoch of evolution. That's temporary. There's ultimately one human being, right? And at the end of this process, while there might be some thousands of years when this after the speciation event where the human beings who take the Michaelic path or the Christic path will have to, because we will feel the suffering of those human beings who go deeper into the mechanistic materialist um, fake reality. We will take care, we will have to take care of them and ultimately my understanding is redeem them, and so that they won't be lost um, to the Armonic influence. Uh, and so there will be a kind of restoration of the wholeness of humanity as a a composite unity of some kind. It's not that our individuality now is unreal; it's very real, and it's the our individual journeys are the stage upon which the evolution of consciousness works itself out. And earlier sessions we were reading, Steiner talk about the history of humanity and how you can really only understand that history if you go beyond just the dates and the wars and um, the labels given to different periods and live into the individual experience of the people who were alive then. Um, and so, yeah, while the drama of evolution unfolds within individual souls and our associations with each other, I think at the end of this process, we are really one human being. Doug.
Hi,
Hi.
good to be here. 2 points. The first one is I want to bring a thought from the non-canonical Gospel of Thomas, where Jesus was asked, could you describe your disciples? And he said something to the effect of, my disciples are working in the fields really hard, but when the master of the fields comes home, and that doesn't mean God, it's just the master that owns the field says, I want my fields back. My disciples will get naked, dis- disrobe, and walk off. And the way I've understood that is people, I think, that are called to the kind of Christianity that these would be people who can work hard because the stakes are high, not because there's eternal hell at stake, but rather the pain of the other parts of our body, this global body, is hurt so much. The stakes are high, but it, whether we win or lose, it doesn't define our own personal identity, that there's a freedom in that. That's the being naked part. There's not keeping anything for ourselves, if you will. So I think that what I want to say here as a counselor for 23 years, I've had an increase of people all over the spectrum of belief systems, whether fundamentalist Christian to atheist, who come in and I'm able to speak a common language, a lingua franca with them that 10 years ago would be new age. Today it's not, and it's very effective. And it goes like this. I would say, if your anxiety had a place to live, where would it be? And they will point to a certain place in their body. If it had a color, what would it be? Across the board, The location is very similar. The colors are very similar. And then I invite them to say, if the luminosity of wholeness had a presence, if you could bring that in, what color would that be? Uh, what would it look like to put that luminosity uh, inside and around the place of pain? How does that feel? So I'm really inviting them into the visual and into the body part. And it feels like, to me, it feels like we're able to do progress of 5 or 6 sessions in a few minutes when I appeal to color visualization and embodiment. So I think there's an openness here across humanity that people are not even asking anymore. I don't know if I trust this path that this guy is leading me on. People are open and hurting, and that is the pathway I think that will all come together is through our individual pains, because you can't run away from that, but we can walk with each other and help heal that through bringing light into those places of stuckness. So I just wanted to offer that a little bit as a counselor's perspective, hopefully tracking with what we're saying here. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. I wonder if others would agree, or if you would agree that that kind of exercise, inviting your clients to consider their inner states in terms of colors and bodily placements, if this might be an example of a kind of nascent imaginative cognition and moving away from just abstract conceptual uh, ways of self-reflection, means of self-reflection, to a more imaginative relationship to our own inner life. It seems like you're inviting people to move down that path. Karsten, please.
Yeah, I just want to clarify my concern about this alarmism, because I think if fear enters too much into the picture when we have this choice between these two paths, so I see there's a meaning in kind of contrasting these two paths. But if fear enters too much into the picture, it becomes less of a free choice whether you choose one or the other. So that's kind of my concern. And there's one other thing I want to say. So a few of you know that I have this background where I studied this Danish mystic called Martinus, and he was quite specific about these things. So he was talking about this. He was using the phrase "judgment day" about what is happening today. But the way he talked about it was he saw the planets as entering into a kind of higher frequency. The soul of the planet is going through some kind of initiatory process, moving into Christ consciousness, and that will make a split in among the humans and even in the animal kingdoms and the plant kingdoms as well, because some beings will be able to follow the planet into this higher frequency, into the Christ consciousness. And the timeline he gave was 3,000 years. That's how long, in his view, it would take. But he said that those who cannot follow this path into Christ consciousness will simply have to incarnate on another planet that is suited for their kind of vibration, and where they can fulfill the kind of dreams and desires they have, whether human beings or animals or plants. And so evolution will go on for these beings, but just in another place.
It's always helpful to remember that the cosmos is vast. There's a place for everyone. Shanik.
I didn't really want to say anything, but then it is that Christmas time, and we did start talking about the whole Christ language, which is what, Aramaic? Somehow I don't think that's maybe what we're going for here. Alexandra talked, really inspired me because the way she was honing in on feelings, which are completely discounted in the modern life as subjective, right? Especially in academia, right? That's a kind of a no-go. So I think that's getting to the heart of what I understand Christ language to be like. So I was thinking about if I think people are kind of new to anthroposophy, so maybe they don't know the foundation stone meditation, which is this kind of seminal mantra of Steiner's work or whatever. You get a kind of a cosmology in like 4 verses. It's pretty spectacular. And the second verse, human soul, you live within the beat of heart and lungs that lead you through the rhythms of time into your own soul's being. Practice spirit pondering in balance of soul, where surging world evolving deeds unite your own eye to the eye of the world, and you will truly feel in human soul activity. There reigns the Christ will, encircling us in the rhythms of the world, bestowing grace upon souls. You spirits of light, creotetes dynamis, exousiae, let through the east being kindled, what through the west is being formed, speaking thus. In Christ, death becomes life. Christus more and more. I love the song. So in that verse, you're going to find rhythm, beat of heart and lungs, right? So I'm no longer a static individual, right? I normally go by a very static notion of who I am. So I'm already entering into a time sphere to some degree when you enter into your rhythmic body. And that's also invoking Michael, who is a being of time, as far as I understand him. So first you have this rhythm. So, you know, practice spirit pondering. So now I'm observing imbalance of soul. So that's a kind of a key point because we brought it up last week that feelings aren't just how I gut feel, right? It's meant to be my transpersonal feelings about things. It's meant to be to some degree, you don't have to be perfect, but after you cleanse yourself of your fears and desires, what is the clarity of feeling you have? So you're kind of pondering things from a balanced point of view, which is very Christ centric in general, the concept of balance. So let's try pondering and balance. So we're surging world evolving deeds, right? And it took me some time to figure that out to some degree. It's the day-night diurnal cycle, it's seasons, it's this expansion into summer, it's the contraction into winter, it's the going of death into winter, it's still being reborn in summer over and over, year after year, conditioning us to be more than just an individual. So I wanted to just give that picture as an idea of what I think of when I think of Christ language, right? And it's certainly not something that necessarily appeals only to my intellect. It certainly, for me, appeals much more to my feeling realm. And then with terms of Armand and Lucifer, it's a funny thing because they were like my enemies for like many, many years. And now they're like my guides. They tell me where I go wrong. And, as much as you want to say that they're your enemy, you have no freedom without Lucifer. And you really don't have a body, according to Steiner's point of view, without Ahriman, a being of form. It kind of, according to Steiner's point of view, False of the Spirits of Darkness is the lecture. He weds you to your body, which we love a lot. Most people I know. So, in terms of working with them, I mean, it may take some time, but they're not necessarily, just the end all beings of evil. To a great degree, they are the seeds of our resurrection and the seeds of a certain deeper, more profound love that's possible. So I just wanted to reflect that. And foundation stone, and especially second verse, is a pretty cool thing.
Thank you, Shanik. Beautiful. Just before we sign off, I want to say that in being dismissive about these sort of new age spiritualities as being about whatever feels good, I don't mean to dismiss feeling in the deeper Christic sense that you're talking about, Shanik, where it's not just my feelings anymore. It's the feeling of both the world rhythms that we are embedded within and also the feeling of that open-heartedness towards the eye of other beings. And if Steiner talks about being able to listen to others and not be afraid that our own eye will be annihilated if we are just silent to let the other in. And I feel like it's the Christ in us that gives us the confidence that our eye will resurrect after we make room in ourselves for someone else, and that can form the basis of a new kind of social life. Um, all right, friends. Thank you so much for your attention and your wisdom and contributions. Look forward to seeing you after Christmas for our next session, number 5. Enjoy these last couple of darkening days before
Yeah.
the light returns.
Merry Christmas. Happy
Merry
winter
Christmas.
solstice.
Yeah. Merry Christmas, everyone.
Absolutely.
Bye.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Turn of the light.